Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. It is 11:35. So we're so happy to have you here for Include. So we hope that everyone is well and working toward recovering from this horrible, debilitating pandemic that will impact and change our lives forever. So be safe and stay well. So good morning. I am so excited to be here. I'm so excited for today. I am Dr. Karen Castlebaum, and I welcome you to November Include. If you are new here and have not been here before, welcome. This is a community in which all are welcome, and we engage in candid conversations and partake in learning as it relates to the importance and awareness of inclusive excellence. We meet quarterly and try to learn from what individuals or organizations are doing to demonstrate inclusive excellence. And we encourage and foster a community of support and kindness of one another. I am so honored today. I don't even know how to behave. This person means so much to me. I know. But I have the honor today of introducing Dr. Nick Pace. Dr. Pace is a former social worker, teacher, coach, principal, currently serves as a professor and a chair of the Department of Educational Administration. Woo-ha, PhD from there. His passion and scholarly focus has been on preparing and sustaining school principals. Let's give a big welcome to Dr. Pace. Use those reaction buttons, please. Let's go. Give some claps. Let me see some. Yes, let's get fired up. Yes. All right, Dr. Pace.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kassabaum. It's an honor to be here. It's really an honor to be asked by Dr. Kassabaum and Jesse Peter and Jerry Harner. Really honored that they asked me for their help in facilitating a conversation today. And I want to thank them for their help in helping me prepare some thoughts. And I'm very appreciative of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for offering so many opportunities to learn and grow. And I'm really appreciative of each of you investing the time to be here. When Dr. Kay and Jerry and Jesse and I met several weeks ago to talk about this presentation, they were tremendously helpful. And to my surprise, I choked and cried my way through most of that conversation as I shared the stories that I'll try to relate today. I want to thank them for holding that space for me and the grace they gave me that day. And I hope to get those stories out with a clearer voice today, but I might not. Among other things, that reminds me of the pain and fear that's so close to the surface for so many people right now in different degrees from different sources. But I think programs like this give us a chance and a venue to do something with that. And so I'm very appreciative of the opportunity and of your time in being here. As we come together today from so many places, different places, I want to acknowledge that we're doing so on the past, present, and future homelands of the Pawnee, Ponca, Oto, Missouri, Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Kaw peoples, as well as the relocated Ho-Chunk, Iowa, and Sac and Fox peoples. And as we treasure the founding principles of UNL as a land-grant institution through the Moral Act, we must not forget that displacement, violence, settlement, and survival are also a part of our history, and that the Moral Act came into U.S. possession often as a result of injustice to Indigenous peoples. This context, I think, is crucial to our conversation today and in the future as we embrace our mission to provide equal access to educational opportunity, seek inclusion, learn from each other, and work to build long-lasting relationships with the Indigenous peoples of Nebraska. So I've identified some goals here with the team's help. try to facilitate a conversation using some memories and stories from my own experience. I invite you to consider your identity and identities and your privilege and position, and hopefully commit to action from where each of us is to promote inclusion. As a little bit of background, I'm a 52-year-old cisgender straight male, parent of grown children, Sienna and Addison, husband to Roxanne. I'm a former social worker, teacher, coach, principal, as Dr. Kay said. Grew up in Winterset, Iowa, in a in a house that was built in 1872. I can relate to Wilkerson's description of America as an old house in chapter 2 of her book, Cast. I can tell you there were a lot of mysteries behind the bulges, cracks, and wonky angles in that house where I grew up. And Wilkerson is spot on when she says that you may not want, for example, to look in the basement after a rainstorm. I did that one time and saw the kitty litter pan floating in about 3 feet of water. So Wilkerson's analogy that America is an old house works for me. Despite how that limestone foundation had settled, despite the years of Midwest weather, despite what the raccoons and the squirrels had done in the attic and in the walls, it was a sturdy house and flawed. And it had problems that, as Wilkerson notes, left unattended, will only get worse until they're untenable. Roxanne and I used to joke that we were from Winterset before Oprah discovered it, before the book and the movie, The Bridges in Madison County. And most people laughed and said, well, you may be from there, but it's never really been cool. But whatever the case, that's one of the places where I come from today. I'm not a sociologist, historian, or anthropologist, and I'm not a diversity scholar. I'm really not an expert in anything related to today's topic, other than my own journey of 50-some years toward learning and understanding how I can work to make the world more just and equitable. This is a team photograph of the 1990 University of Northern Iowa Panthers. This was a good team. It was 23-9 and was one of only 2 teams in NCAA tournament history for a 13 seed to beat a 14 to beat a 3 seed. But that's not why we're here today, but set that context. There was very little racial or ethnic diversity where I grew up. I recall a Native American classmate, but I didn't know him well. I attended the University of Northern Iowa on a basketball scholarship, and that's where most of my exposure to diversity broadly defined began. I was a college kid in the early 90s, a sociology major and a history minor, so I wasn't oblivious to issues of power and privilege and oppression, but I suppose I wasn't dialed into them really either. My basketball teammates and I kept our interaction around race pretty light, like whether KRS-One or Public Enemy or Guns N' Roses would be up next on the locker room stereo. I'm going to date myself a little bit further and say that starter jackets were all the rage. And for those who don't know, starter jackets were popular in the 90s. NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA teams, always team colors, team logos, often satin. So if you want to go full retro, you can pick up a starter jacket somewhere. But beyond the jokes, I remember being struck how my Black teammates would talk about leaving their starter jackets in the locker room when they went home for the weekend or for spring break. And I thought, well, that's a nice jacket and it's cold, you're going to want the jacket. And I felt embarrassed when they patiently explained that those jackets were the wrong color. For the gangs that operated in their neighborhoods. And it really stopped me. And I didn't have the language to call it privilege or the insight to do much with it at the time. But it hit me, and it never really left. I think Jesse's got a poll question here. Invite you to reflect a little bit. Have you ever had an experience where you perhaps suddenly realized a privilege that others around you did not possess? And if so, did you have the knowledge or insight or skill, perhaps the language, to do something with it or to act on that realization? This is very timely, watching the returns come in.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Dr. K, would you like me to stop sharing those results, or do you all have that?
Yeah, I'll stop. We had, 99% that said yes, 1% no. If yes, have you acknowledged the language? Did you have knowledge, language, skill? 17 yes, 83% said no.
Gotcha. The second story, years later, after college, I was principal at a small rural high school, and I would meet periodically with the counselor to talk about things that were going on with our students, families, teachers, etc. It was a small town of 1,500 or so people, 2 or 3 gas stations that also served pizza and carry-out sandwiches. And it was a spring day, and the counselor and I were in my office, and she shared with me that a member of the senior class of 38 had come out to anybody that was paying attention, and he planned to attend the prom with his boyfriend, who was a student from another school. And I leaned back in my office chair and I said, well, you got to talk him out of it. And those words just came out of my mouth, and they weren't based on my beliefs about sexual orientation. I had had some gay friends in college, but I hadn't given sexual orientation much thought. And to be clear, the counselor knew that I didn't expect her to leave my office and go talk Pete, the student, out of his plans. My first thought centered around the powerfully negative, maybe violent reaction that I anticipated in the school and community. And I felt responsible for preventing those kinds of reactions. The murder of Matthew Shepard had happened a couple of years before, and I didn't expect that level of violence, but I was really concerned about humiliation, harassment, assault. At the time, compulsory heterosexuality or toxic masculinity weren't words I used, but I was nearly obsessed with fears around the learning environment and his safety at school. And what do you do about the PE locker room? And how many times a day do I need to check the parking lot? And I can remember wondering if I needed to, make it a practice of checking the lug nuts on his car, because I think I had read somewhere that a gay person had been involved in a car crash, and they determined that someone had sabotaged the car. Felt like I needed to be everywhere. Despite my fears and worst case scenarios, none of those things came to pass, and Pete actually only had a couple of negative things said to him at school, to my amazement. The students, and especially the girls, rallied around him in an unmistakable way. He attended the prom virtually without incident or disruption. And a couple weeks after the prom, word came that Pete was being awarded one of the first Matthew Shepard scholarships in Iowa, which covered full tuition, books, and fees at a state university. I knew having that award presented at the school awards night in a packed gym of 1,200 people was the right thing to do, and I knew we would do it, even though other schools had chosen to not allow that award to be presented, and even in recent years, some have chosen not to allow it to be presented. But again, I thought the odds were pretty good. I'd have to pack somebody out of the gym for being violent or disrespectful or disruptive. The town relied on the county sheriff 18 miles away for law enforcement. So I didn't know what we would do if Fred Phelps from the Westboro Baptist Church showed up to protest, as they had done a week before when the award was presented to another student elsewhere in the state. Thankfully, none of those things happened. And I was more than a little disappointed in myself for having assumed the worst and anticipated only negative outcomes. Later that summer, I left the school and transitioned to a faculty position in higher education back at my alma mater. And later I conducted some research into the events of that spring and Pete's senior year. I think Jesse has made one of those pieces available in the chat if you're interested in reading it. But through that process, I talked pretty extensively with Pete about the events of that spring and his coming out experience and what he anticipated and what he experienced at school. And he sent me an email during that time that really moved me. And it wasn't anything I had done. It was a lot of things, but it wasn't anything I had done. Despite my apprehensions and my fears, Pete had given us the chance to choose a side. And he'd given educators like me the opportunity to grow. He'd given us a chance to use a bit of our power and privilege. He'd given us a gift, even though my initial self-reaction and self-absorption prevented me from seeing it as such. I would have gladly passed on the whole experience given the choice. I'm very glad I didn't have that opportunity to pass now. The third story I want to quickly share with you is how do people respond to your work? This is a stairwell in the Schindler Education Center at the University of Northern Iowa. A few years after Pete's graduation, I had returned to my alma mater, as I said, and I was working on my doctoral dissertation, which examined the school experiences of 8 other students who were openly gay or lesbian in high school and who also had received a Matthew Shepard scholarship. And one day I was talking with a female colleague from another discipline on this landing in the stairwell. And she also did some research related to sexual minority youth and sexuality in general. And she asked how people were responding to my research. And I said, great, people have been nothing but supportive. I've had tons of encouragement. And that was really true to a person. My colleagues and mentors had really enthusiastically encouraged me to pursue my work and to share it. They were generally, or I should say, they were genuinely excited about what I was doing. How about you? I asked, and she shared a different story. She said that even well-meaning colleagues who were supportive of her and her work had discouraged her from pursuing that line of research until after tenure. Stay away from the sexual minority youth stuff and sexual orientation stuff. And they cautioned her that it might put a spotlight on her, or it might generate suspicion or unwanted scrutiny. She was new to campus and unpartnered. My situation was different. And as we stood there and talked, I felt surprised and then very naive as we talked about how our research wasn't that different, but the reactions sure were. And in that moment, I felt layers of privilege come more clearly into view, one stacked on another. And I've listed a few of them here. But it struck me that day in the stairwell that I had multiple get out of jail free cards that my colleague lacked. And to be clear, she was and is a stronger scholar and better researcher. I am convinced. But other things seemed to matter more, like my gender, my being married, my having kids, my visibility in the community, being a basketball player from there, my privilege. My practice and outlook changed further to include much more awareness and attention to being purposeful about trying to serve as an ally and advocate. I had a much deeper sense of my privilege and also ways I could do something positive with it. And to be sure, I felt awkward about how easily I had missed what was so painfully obvious to her and others. But that exchange broadened my view, my evolving view of the world and of equity and of my role in bringing the latter to the former. Last spring, I sat at home at my card table office with tears in my eyes following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others on my mind. And anger and disbelief and crushing sadness and uncertainty of what to do. And so with that uncertainty, I reached out to my Black teammates. I told my guys that my heart hurt for them. And I told them that I know they live with challenges that I don't know anything about and that I will not experience. I told them I wasn't looking for them to tell me I was a woke white guy, but that my heart hurt for them. I told them I was afraid for them, for their sons and their daughters and their wives. My son had gone to shoot hoops at the school playground the night before of our text exchange. And the playground, I think, was officially closed because of the virus. And I told him I was sure that if it was one of their sons at the playground shooting hoops, somebody probably would have called the police. And what often happens after that breaks my heart. I told him that other than vote and donate and learn and try to use my position and privilege to acknowledge and address racism and injustice, I wasn't sure what to do. We had a really good exchange, and they shared some things that I knew and some things that I didn't. And then at one point I said, it seems like the whole world has lost its mind. And then John Cox, number 22, point guard from Springfield, Illinois, who does diversity work at our alma mater, said, no, it was always lost. It's exposed to the light and not in the darkness anymore. And there it was again. I said, you're right. My privilege kept me from seeing it. despite years of learning and efforts to address injustice and prejudice and racism, and even being recognized for some of those efforts, despite being more in tune to my immense privilege than I once was, I still needed JC to point it out to me. To make it plain, I was and am angry with myself, embarrassed and ashamed that I still needed to be shown. I can't believe that after all this journey traveled, all the books read, all the professional development sessions attended, degrees earned, and diversity committees served on, I still needed it. Isabel Wilkerson could have been quoting me on page 4 of Caste when she wrote about people saying, "This is not America. I don't recognize my country." Wilkerson recognized it, and so did my teammates, and I needed them to help me see it. I changed this slide, or actually Jesse had to change it about 14 times because I kept changing things. But she changed this slide from lessons learned past tense to learning lessons present tense, because if I've learned anything, it's that I have more work to do. And so I'll try to capture a few of those lessons here. First, I think Covey is right. We have to seek first to understand. These are some of the questions that come up for me in my story. I invite you to think about these questions and think about your own life and your own path, and come up with your own questions and try to answer them. What's it like to have to leave your jacket in the locker room? What's it like to wonder if your sexual orientation or gender or race or disability or religion or language or immigration status or will override every other thing about you? What's it like to have great passion and talent and be discouraged, dissuaded, dismissed, delayed, and detoured from pursuing it? What's it like to feel that you have to ignore what Parker Palmer calls your soul's imperative, or that one thing that you can't not do? Some more learning lessons. I'm learning that all those layers of privilege give me an audience that some people can't access. And that's not right. But in some circles, my privilege equates to, for lack of a better word, credibility and access. And again, I don't think it's right. But I've learned that I can get an audience with athletic directors or with coaches or with school administrators, educators, some folks who aren't all diversity warriors by nature, but most of whom I believe want to do good. I once wrote a letter to the editor promoting marriage equality. And I also made the mistake of reading the online comments, which I never recommend now. But despite the things I was called, one of my takeaways was that for some people, being the former basketball player, former principal, whatever, made me an okay guy with reasonable points to make, and not a crazy activist, their words. And that showed me that maybe I can bring some people along a bit, whereas other people, most of whom are better qualified to make the same argument and to try to get to the same place, would have been dismissed or discounted, devalued, uninvited. And again, that's not right. But if I've got that lane, I think it's incumbent upon me to take the opportunity and to try. Despite all that privilege, it took 22 attempts before I found a publisher to accept my first book, The Principal's Challenge: Learning from Gay and Lesbian Students, based on my dissertation research. I don't think that's because it was horribly written, but rather because at the time, publishers and school leadership weren't very interested in talking about the sexual orientation of high school kids. They were more interested in talking about test scores or publishing books on charter schools or safer stuff. And I think that's another really important thing to look at because it's structural. It's structural in the sense of it reflects what gets shared, what gets talked about, who controls the conversation, and what's undiscussable. Maybe we base those decisions on what'll sell or what won't. And who makes those decisions? The editorial board, credentialed white guys with experiences that match mine, the conference planning committee, the publishing house, the White House. This quote is often attributed to, wait for it, a white guy named Benjamin Franklin, but I have been able to find no evidence that he actually said it, but I believe it to be true. In that spirit, I've had to become outraged over my guys leaving their jackets in the locker room and the individual and systemic racism that shows how far we haven't come. I've had to allow myself to be outraged at the things students in my dissertation research more than 15 years ago shared about their high school experiences that I know are the reality for far too many still today. I've had to become outraged at how much I still miss in multiple settings. I've had to allow myself to become outraged at how my colleague was discouraged, discounted, and redirected. And as I said, outraged at how much I still miss, still don't understand, despite my best efforts, frustrations, inadequacies, and tears. I'm fortunate to be participating in the Big Ten Academic Alliance Leadership Program this year with some staggeringly talented leaders and scholars from across the conference. In a discussion last Friday about leadership that supports diversity, equity, and inclusion, Dr. Christine Simonian Bean of the University of Michigan said, "As our personal risk decreases, our responsibility increases." I think that captures a lot. So for me, that responsibility is to my teammates, to Pete, to my colleague, and to so many others, to use my privilege to illuminate the individual and systemic racism and inequity, and to dismantle the beliefs, behaviors, and structures that underlie it through my official role and my job, and through my work as a private citizen, through things like engaging in 103 things white people can do for racial justice. When I first became familiar with that list in June, it was only 75 things, so I've got still more things to do. And it's also my responsibility to trust dudes like JC to point out my failings and to thank them for doing it out of love. I don't have a recipe for how this is supposed to work, and a lot of folks talk about how it's messy work and it's hard and it's dangerous and we make mistakes and it's hurtful, etc. And so I tried to capture a few points here. One is embrace the space and seize that opportunity when it presents itself and look for those opportunities wherever we are. And it's not an all-inclusive list, but listening is big. Check yourself. Push, advocate, demand. Admit mistakes. Listen some more. Get uncomfortable. Be vulnerable. Repeat. This is the old house I grew up in at 422 West Jefferson in Winterset, Iowa, which is nearly as old as UNL now. And I believe Wilkerson's right in chapter 2, as I said, when she describes America as an old house. Overlooking brittle shingles will cause the roof to eventually leak, and it'll rot the roof joists. Ignoring weight and weather's toll on the stacked limestone foundation will eventually bring instability. And even the most frugal owner knows that the coal-burning furnace and knob and spool wiring eventually become obsolete and have to be replaced. Ignore those at your peril. That's the reality if you're going to live in an old house. Wilkerson's words remind me of another smart woman, my mother, who likes to say, nothing works in an old house but the people. Both of these women are right, and friends, we've got some work to do on this old house. I'm deeply honored to have been with you today. Very much value your presence and your commitment and the work that you do, and I sure appreciate you being here.
Oh, wow. I just want to sit in it for a minute, right? Just want to sit in it for a minute. Wow, that was awesome. That was awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Pace. We appreciate you sharing your journey, your lived experiences. Woo, that was amazing. So I just want to open it up. If anyone has any questions for Dr. Pace, please use your raise your hand button and we'll take a few questions. But wow, that was awesome. Thank you. There's a lot going on in that chat. Check it out. They're loving on you. Loving. Yeah. Jerry, did we get any questions?
No, we do not have any raised hands.
All right. Thank you. All right. Yeah, that was a lot to take in. All right. Oh, thank you again so much. We're going to transition now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Peter. I'm the graduate assistant with Dr. Kassabaum. We'll now transition into breakout rooms to discuss how these 3 books have helped us have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can use these prompts to help you in this discussion, and we welcome everybody to participate, even if you've not got a chance to read the book. Jerry will put in a link for the prompts and we can use that. As you are discussing, be prepared to share some of your action steps, key learnings, or change in perspective when you come back. Seeing the size of the group, it might take us about a minute to transition, so bear with us. Thanks.
I guess we were the group that followed the rules.
How the other people get to stay in? I mean,
I
we
know.
should have
Maybe
done
we
that.
can-
We should have to stay.
Maybe we can just keep meeting.
I wish all of our students are like this, right? Make our job so much easier.
And one thing that the book I was reading, never mind. Everybody's
No,
coming.
please go ahead.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We'll just give it some more time to make sure everybody joins us. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I want to invite anyone who discussed the book cast to share some of your learnings with the group. You can raise your hand and then Jerry will unmute you or all right. I think Marnie Nelson is raising her hand. Let me try. Yep.
Yes, as the spokesperson for our group, we had a really great conversation. We talked a lot about conversations and perspectives and different voices and how that is needed more and more in classes and education and in our conversations and how much we appreciated that. We link that back to how important these conversations are and hopefully inviting more people to these conversations to see their value and build even a more richer, robust conversation with more and more folks.
Thanks, Marnie, for sharing. Any other thoughts from the cast book? I know Dr. Pace referred to that quite a bit, so that was helpful for me. I cannot see everyone on one screen, so in case you're raising your hand and I miss you, sorry. Jerry, do we have anyone else in line?
No one has used the raise your hand feature yet.
Okay.
Probably because we're trying to like, where is that feature at? Like nobody knows how to use that thing.
Okay. Oh, I see Michelle Harvey.
Yeah, I read Cast, well, almost the first 10 chapters, and I found it, you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
I found it to be a really fascinating perspective that I had never thought of, because she doesn't use the word racism in the book. She talks about how that's not her perspective, and her perspective is setting up the caste very similar. She compares it to India, and it was just a really interesting perspective and allowed me to think about where we are in our country and how it's laid out very differently from other places and how we've gotten to where we are. So what I've loved about the first third of the book is just putting me understanding more of how we've had the events of the past year and where all of this is coming from, and just in a different perspective of the term that some, oh, you're racist and move on, but she just really lays it out in a very systematic, this is why we feel this way. And I'm looking forward to getting to the end of the book to hopefully she gives some tips on how we can get past this direction. But so far it's been super fascinating and an interesting perspective. And her comparison to the house that Dr. Pace brings up was just, it's so easy for me to internalize, seeing how that's exactly how she's setting it up. And it's really interesting and a great read.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'm going to open up the floor for anyone who's discussed how to be an inclusive leader and some of your thoughts on that.
Dr. Jones has raised her hand.
Yes, so I'm reading this book, and actually our group was fascinating because we were all reading a different book, so it was really nice to see the parallels across the books. But the one interesting thing so far for me, and I don't know if this is a good strategy or not, but it's sort of like just naturally happening, I think, as I read the book. And because I am in a leadership role, and the part of the book that talks about the stages or the categories of leaders, if you will, being unaware, aware, active, and advocate. It's interesting now as I'm moving around in my role and around campus to think about where other leaders are that I'm engaged with, and also the barriers that I see. I really felt that in my role, when I moved to the level of dean, I would be able to have change. I would be able to help things change. And the barriers that I run into is just, it's incredible, to tell you the honest truth. It's just incredible. And I'm not giving up, but it's, I feel the barriers.
Thank you for sharing, Dean Jones. Is there like a action that you've taken to maybe tackle one of these challenges?
Well, so like one of the things, I actually pulled up the book this morning, like in the active stage, right? You're proactively working toward equity and equal opportunity, supporting those underrepresented and marginalized identities. And I think a couple of things that, that I have done are, we're being very bold and, I'm going to say critical, but we're being bold and critical of ourselves as a college. I mean, we're taking a good hard look at ourselves in the mirror. We're not afraid to do that. And I think that's important. And then, for me personally, I'm seeking out all that feedback and all that assistance where people can help us move forward, right? So people can be harsh in their words. People can be very critical. But the first thing I say is, thank you for the feedback. How can you help us? And that has really enabled a lot of people to come to the table that maybe previously, would not have, or if I'd responded differently, would have stepped back and been and stayed silent. But I'm trying not to have that happen, right? That we want everybody at the table.
Thanks for sharing that. All right. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, I think Erin Omar has raised her hand. Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things that was interesting in the book, and we kind of talked about in our group, is how you can be farther along in the stages of being an inclusive leader for one group, but then not really be aware of struggles of another group. And so it's this constant stage of moving forward and then kind of starting back over at the beginning and moving forward, and being okay with that. And to echo what Dr. Jones just said, like always listening and looking for others to help you. And what Dr. Pace said earlier, sometimes you need someone else to point out your shorts, like what you don't know yet, but acknowledging that and being able to move forward. But I just thought it was interesting that, you might think like, oh, I'm this really great advocate. And then you realize like, oh, but I've completely missed out on this other group of people. So I think that was one of the big takeaways for me.
Okay. Thanks, Erin, for sharing that. I completely agree with you. Like, it's important to acknowledge like where you stand, right? Like some things you're doing and some things where you can do more. So yeah, absolutely. We have Jennifer Wood next. All right.
So I'm not reading this book, but I have a question. I have a question to throw out, and whoever wants to answer. But how do you do this and keep people from getting defensive? So I grew up in a really small town. I grew up with plenty of people who racial, gender, all of those things were bad. I am in a department where you know, people I think will get defensive if we have these conversations. So is there a good strategy for preventing some of that defensiveness? I mean, I can read the book, I suppose I should do that, but just curious if there's anything there that talks about how to prevent people from immediately having that visceral defensive response.
Well, Jennifer, yes, you should read. But I don't think you can control people, right? Because it's an emotional thing, right? So people might get upset, or people might go negative right away, but tone helps, continued conversations help, right? And gaining some skills to have those conversations with help. So people are going to be angry. People are going to be negative.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm not sure if you can, I don't know, I've never been able to prevent any
one else's.
Yeah, any reaction that, but I think for me, what's been helpful is like, I think what is helpful for me is like to recognize the humanity of this all. And I think that gives me a bit of room to just be like, you know, it's not at me per se, it feels like it. And I think there are times when it's my humanity on the line. So it feels really personal. And at the same time, it's gonna be uncomfortable. And I think for me, it's like figuring out how I can tolerate that discomfort and how I continue to have this conversation or not, and how I do that in a way that also preserves how I can do that in that moment. It's hard. Like yeah, it's hard. And I think it's also important for my own work.
Yeah, I think it's when you think about courage, you think about trust and skill. You know, you have to accept that people will come at you when you wake somebody up from their sleep. They might get angry at you. They might attack you. Are you willing to take on that risk? And then skill, there's a lot of information out there about how to facilitate conversation, critical conversation. Like I talk to my student all the time. If you feel triggered, you could name it and say, this is how I feel. I wonder how it's affecting other people in the group, or would you please explain to me, where did you get this information from? You know, like as a facilitator, that is, I think, part of your responsibility to do that self-work and that skill training. And I think it's also the trust, like Dr. Kasabam, everywhere you go in UNL, you know that she's, you know, giving you the truth. I have students who come to me and say, hey, Dr. K told me to do this and I'm doing it. Right? So I think it's the trust that's important. And I hope that your leadership is supportive. I think that's another very important part, that people might have resistance at first, but if the leader leads by example and show up to all the meeting and, you know, modeling like Dr. Pace did, their vulnerability, their courage, then people starting to follow the example.
Yeah, that's a great point, Anna.
Yeah, I think next we have Lisa Frick and then Jonathan Egan to make a comment.
Yeah, this is Lisa Fricky, and I agree with Dr. K and the other speakers. One of my dear friends who's since passed away, or he's not a doctor, but Frank Lemire, said meaningful change doesn't happen unless you have the feel uncomfortable in situations. It is going to be uncomfortable, but I think the advice of the previous speakers is very, very important. And listening to understand. There might be a trigger in somebody's life where they hear something or see something, they get enraged, but you need to listen to understand rather than to listen to think of a rebuttal. So I just share that.
It's a great point. Thanks so much.
I think that, I'm not sure exactly how to phrase this, but particularly with the conversation that we've been having about racism recently, I think that for a lot of people, there is this fear that I mean, they do not consider themselves to be racist or anything of that nature, but there is this fear that everyone sort of understands something that they don't. And so they don't want to talk about it because they feel like they, you know, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around. I mean, the scope of it is enormous. And I think what is helpful, at least in conversation, is to acknowledge and reassure them that, I mean, nobody has the answers. Nobody is really able to encompass this entire thing and articulate it. And the reason you are having this conversation with this person is that you are both learning. And I think that's an important approach to take. I mean, I certainly, I'm not going to have a conversation with someone and pretend that I know what I'm talking about. And I think if you can help them understand that you're both kind of really on the same level and you're both growing, you're not preaching at them.
Right.
I think that's good.
Yeah. And Erin has some good stuff in the chat talking about, she also talks about how it can be helpful to know your audience. Sometimes it's better to focus on facts instead of stories. Other times empathy more effective and continued exposure to different points of views. That's really good. Yeah.
Okay. We're making some great comments over here, so I thank everybody for participating, but I'm also trying to keep track of time. So as I want Ann Koopman to make the next comment, but as she is talking, I want everybody to think about the third book that we had in our list, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So if we have any final comments, we can share maybe one more after Ann, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Well, Jesse, I am in the one, How to Be an Anti-Racist, but
perfect.
Here, one of the things, because in setting the tone and having some of these conversations in my work and in our department, we've had some icky situations, as I would call it. But what I just want to say is how appreciative I am to have these groups and this group to come to and have these conversations, because when it gets hard, the people that usually come to these groups can help you through those moments. And so this was something I needed in this busy time. You always like, oh, I don't know if I have time, but I'm so appreciative of that, because just hearing you all or talking in the small group about this book really gave me hope to go back into those conversations that I know can get a little messy, and have the courage to continue to do that. So that's what I wanted to say, is I appreciate this so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep coming back. Keep coming back.
Okay. Anyone wants to take the final comment before we wrap up? Okay. All right. All right. I thank everybody for participating, and I encourage you to continue reading and learning. I hope to see all of you in the next meeting. So I will hand it over to Dr. K now.
Thank you. I'm curious of how many people got into their groups and was just like, and you can use your reaction buttons, and we're just like, oh, I just want to sit here for a minute and just, think about everything that Dr. Pace said. I really don't want to answer those questions right now. Yeah, use your reaction buttons to show me, because I know I was one of those folks that were just like, wow, I wanted to sit for a minute. Yes, for sure. Oh my goodness, it was so amazing. But the conversation, I had a dynamite group. It was really good. It was really fun. So our next meeting, which I'm very excited about, is going to be on February 18th, 2021. Can we get to 2021, y'all? Can we get rid of COVID at the same time? That would be fantastic. The conversation will be led by Dr. Deborah Hope and Mr. Nathan Woodruff on reducing health disparities for transgender and gender diverse people. So make sure you mark your calendars. You obviously will get responses or email reminder. I also just really want to thank again, and if we can use those reaction buttons for real, Dr. Pace for sharing his lived experience and his stories with us. It's wonderful. I also want to thank Jerry Harner for making all this stuff happen. She's always behind the scenes, making things move and shake. I so appreciate her. I so appreciate being on a team with her. And then I just have a little quote. Diversity is a fact. Inclusion is an act. The author is unknown. Be inclusive. Visit our website. Sign up for our newsletter. Share your Husker Action on My Husker Action. You can find that on diversity@unl.edu. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Yep, we're on social media now. And enjoy the day. And remember, be inclusive. Thank you.